Anyway,
shall we move on from Islam to religion generally? You write about religion being a valuable break on the dangers of utopian thinking, because when we have an idea of a life hereafter, we are more easily reconciled with the fact that things are not perfect on this earth.
Well, I don't want to say anything quite as simple as that, because I think there are elements of utopianism in every religion, especially when the religion takes a millenarian form, as Christianity did every now and then in the Middle Ages.
And Al-Qaeda is doing now.
And Al-Qaeda does now, exactly. That you can easily turn the normal pious procedures and beliefs of a religious believer in a utopian direction. If you promise some kind of salvation that he can achieve here and now in conjunction with his fellows. What I would say is that it seems to me indubitable that there is a religious need in human beings. How it came about, whether it's a socially engendered thing or whether it is an evolutionary adaptation or whatever you want to say, it is there. And there must be good ways of managing it as well as bad ways of managing it. And I think that my own view is that the Christian way, especially as modified by the Enlightenment, is the right way to manage it. You manage it by removing religion from public life and giving it that, emphasizing the aspect of charity and forgiveness which lies at the heart of the Christian message. And that, I think, has done a lot of good in Europe. It is interesting that when the millenarian enthusiasms took hold of Europe again, it was in the French Revolution and in the 20th century revolutions of the fascist and communist revolutions, all of which were explicitly anti-religious and anti-Christian. It's when we lost the moderating influence of Christianity that we went mad again.
So there's also a danger in ruthless atheism, unscrupulous atheism.
Yes.
How do you view that, Mr. van Rossem?
Well, I'm an atheist, but atheists can be quite normal and friendly and polite citizens of any country, in my opinion. Having religion as such is no guarantee for being an attractive or nice person. I mean, there are terrible believers and there are very friendly unbelievers, and there are terrible unbelievers and very friendly believers. It just depends on the person and on the situation. And religion can be a force for good, and religion, as we all know, if you look at the history of Christianity, can be a terrible force. And to some extent, this whole idea of realizing a paradise on earth is rooted in Christian thinking, in the idea that history leads to a final point, to a final conclusion or situation. Look at these fundamentalist Christians in the United States, who have really strange ideas about the coming end of history.
Right, so this also seems to be a point where the both of you take generally the same view.
Well,
Mr. Scruton?
I think over 1,000 pages of ruminations would probably differ. I think it's quite right to emphasize that Christian concepts are still influential in utopian movements in the West, insofar as those utopian movements still exist. But I think we should give credit to Christianity for many of the things that we've inherited, and in particular for the thing that I think both of us value, which is secular government. And this was something which we see from the very beginning in the parable of the tribute money, when Christ said, "Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's," meaning to emphasize that the jurisdiction here on earth is a man-made thing, and God's law is obeyed inwardly and with a view to the afterlife, not to life in this world.
Do such traditions also exist in Islam?
They don't, Islamic political thinking is unable to recognize the validity of secular law in my reading of it, it's always regarded as a temporary expedient, making the way for the final, the salafa, the final society of followers, in which the law that is obeyed is exactly that which was given by God to Muhammad.
Therefore, there seems to be a stronger problem of utopianism in Islamic tradition than in Christian tradition, in your view.
I would say that certainly that this was one of Christ's greatest gifts to humanity, that separation of the religious order from the secular order.
Would you like to respond one more time before we go on to architecture?
I have a few problems with Christianity, in the sense that I think when Christians are in the political majority, as they have been in the Netherlands up until 1967, that is the first time that they lost their parliamentary majority, they have a strong tendency not to have a clear divide between secular government on the one side and the things that the church or the believers want for themselves on the other side. And as when they are in a majority, they have a tendency to force the minority, which is maybe exists of non-believers or people with different religions, be it Jews or whatever, to force them to live according to their particular rules. Look at the typical Protestant Sunday, which was one of the most terrible day in my youth was Sunday.
Yeah, but the point was actually that the difference.
It was always there was
Mr.
always.
Van Rossem, the point was actually the difference between Islam and Christianity. If you wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, that is to some extent that's true, but that has to do with the development of Islamic countries and the development of Islam in the 19th century. And Islam has also a long tradition of pragmatism, and they have their wonderful periods when they were rather tolerant. It largely depends on the particular situation and what the leaders of such a religious movement actually think. And then, of course, in all religions, there's an enormous difference between the fundamentalists. You've got fundamentalist Jews, you've got fundamentalist Christians, you've got fundamentalist believers in Islam. And of course, most of the believers tend to be completely normal people who live their daily lives without any idea that they will realize paradise the next week.
Good, let's leave it at that at this point. I just wanted to touch upon one final subject that I'm afraid you are agreeing upon, which is...
if you like me to disagree, I'm quite willing to do so. It depends on the point, of course, to someone.